Cool. All right. We are joined today with Quinton Maldonado. Actually, Quinton, I don't know if am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
Yes,
Cool. Awesome.
Maldonado.
Awesome. Um, Quinton got their BFA from Western Washington University, so you were an alum. Then your MFA from shoot, Tyler, right?
Yes, Tyler School of Art,
Nice. And
and the photography.
now you're working and living in New York City, and just the other day
Mhm.
you were commenting on how awesome that was.
New York is awesome. I gotta give it up. It's wonderful.
Um, this just turned into a pro New York advertisement. uh, cool. Anyways, thank you so much for spending your time and joining us this evening, especially since you're ahead of us in the time zone. So I appreciate you staying up late for us. I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Need to open my mic setting and turn on my mic.
My mic. Oh yeah.
Whatever you
No,
gotta do.
no worries. No
No
worries.
pressure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, yes. Thank you, Dana. I really appreciate being back to speak to your class and give this artist presentation. I have kind of pulled a collection from both my archives as well as some of my contemporary work to discuss today because I feel like, and I think uh, maybe to give a little bit of behind the scenes sort of things away, try and whenever giving an artist talk, like think about working and reworking like my own sort of like organization and collection of images, especially as a photographer generating so much. Because I think it can be uh, the way in which our relationship to like being an artist in this moment, in which like things like the art market and Instagram and all of these other pressures uh, create an assumption of artistic branding or identity that it's very important to always be going back and reworking and rethinking the way in which you perceive your own work. And so, but I'm getting ahead of myself, I realize. And so, just to reiterate what Dana was saying, my name is Quinton. I graduated from Western with my BFA in photography, with specifically thinking about new media, digital media, glitch art, that sort of realm of uh, especially where contemporary art was around 2015 when I was graduating from school, and then graduated from Tyler School of Art out here in Philadelphia, which is under the Temple University, with my MFA in photography, which was slightly hilarious as I was doing a lot of installation, but we'll get into that shortly. So let me share my screen uh, as I have my PowerPoint all ready to show y'all.
Quinton, I
So
don't mean to interrupt you, but is it okay if I say that it's fine if people jump in with questions and comments along the way?
absolutely, yeah.
Cool. And then
Please,
I did
I
want to say welcome to Sam. Good to see you.
hello, Sam.
Hello.
Uh,
uh, so okay, so yes, this is an image of me originally or in my old natural habitat in grad school. The plastic sheeting that I'm standing on in the ground is going to make a lot of appearances throughout this presentation, so uh, just be warned. So I want to kick things off by starting to think about, like, I know that this is a photography class, so I want to talk about portraiture and the way in which portraiture and what that has meant to me throughout the years has really informed lots of elements of my practice, and how it's always been like a process, like a going back and forth in different ways in the my own understanding of what portraiture is, how do I go about it, those types of things. And so to begin with, this is an image of one of my good friends who's a sculpture artist, Rachel Sue. She and I met back at Western, actually. And I like to start with this image because I think one of the things about photography that's very interesting is that photography is always an editing down process, in which like you begin with the world and then the nature of the frame keys it in. And but that is always such a like a live editing process in which just a few feet makes all the difference between this being a like straight studio portrait versus it having this sort of greater expansion of like meta-ness, like studio photos of the studio type of thing. But studio portraiture to me has always been a really important part of my practice because I think it's just such a important way to get to know others, and like thinking of how portraiture just in general, especially in this moment, is like so ubiquitous. We utilize our images, like our self-image, in these different ways to communicate all types of particular emotions, very specific events, or like our reactions to them. But the history of portraiture is oftentimes linked with, especially when we think about like the painted portrait, these types of like archives and statements that are supposed to be holistic or definitive in some sort of way, in contrast to the speed of the sort of social image that we treat our own images as, these sort of like emotional bits that travel back and forth. And so the studio makes us slow down in these ways that are like, oops, sorry, that I think, especially as when you're beginning as an artist or like, or as a photographer, or even all the way up to like when you've been doing it for a while, there is a type of, I don't want to be too romantic and say like it's a type of magic, but I do think that there is like this exercise in control that's very helpful in understanding one's process. And to go back to thinking about Renaissance portraiture, I think that or I guess I don't think this is a thing that I'm stealing from a art critic, but the former art critic for, I believe it was the Nation, in his review of the retrospective of Degas that happened many moons ago at this point, or no, Velasquez, excuse me, talks about how what like separates the Renaissance portrait from many previous forms is that it acts as this kind of presence of another, like we get to know them in some sort of way. And I think that that's what the best portraits really do, is that uh, they project this sense of like knowing and acknowledgement, both from the person that we're seeing, like the subject, but also us onto them. So there's a type of double acknowledgement, which is like it is a type of like psychological fiction to a degree, because we can never really know somebody so deeply through a portrait, because it is just this like still moment in time. But I do think that the best portraits kind of give us that sense that like we're seeing something deeper than we could actually see if we were even in front of this person to a degree. And so that's like one element of my portraiture practice. Another is like instant photos. And this one, not in the studio. This is more in life of another sculpture slash painter friend, Brandon Strauss, who is, I believe, now going to Tyler as well. And this is using instant SX70 film, which if you haven't used an SX70 camera from Polaroid, it's just one of the best things. The whites are always so like milky. They always look very dreamy because you get this like very slow like ISO speed for the instant film. And it's one of my favorite types of film for that reason. And you get to like have a level of control with instant film that there's such a dialectical type of like instant film image that is the portrait, where it's like one can be like the very cool snapshotty, like very kind of, there's almost like a youthfulness or like a in its instantaneousness. But then on the other hand, you have this film that requires so much light and time that for instant uh, uh, that it allows a greater like possibility, I guess, which is one of the reasons that I really love using it, even though the film is sometimes harder to get to. Uh,
That
this, on the
camera
other
also
hand,
has like a little bit of a like a use introduction kind of, right? Like you have to like pop it open or something. Like it does. It's not like just
yeah,
take it out and take a press a button, right?
no, it's much more intricate. It does look like a kind of like an expandable, like almost purse or something, which
Yeah,
I find very fun. It's a very cool camera. It's very slick, fashionable even.
nice. I just wanted to also jump in real quick and say welcome to Eli.
And Violet, it looks like.
Are
Hello.
you with someone else?
Yes, we're both here.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Noted.
Sorry to
Um,
be.
No worries.
no.
Just talking about portraits right now. So if you have any thoughts or questions or anything, always feel free to chime in, and I will try and answer or respond the best that I can. Um, so this is an image of one of my friends, Mirna, who is a also a sculptor. I was like an honorary sculpture student when I was at Tyler, which was very funny. But she had this like the white fabric that she's wrapped herself in was something that she had been wanting to do something with. And at the time, I was making all of these light sculptures, and so we used some of the lighting equipment that I had, and she's laying on top of it, and so it's giving that kind of glow and presence in this blacked out room. And I think that one of the things that is like so interesting about portraiture is uh, like the tension of the gaze is always so important to reckon with. I think because of certain discourses or dialogues um, that were very popular when I was going to undergrad, especially, and certainly elements of it in grad school. Like the notion of the male gaze is this thing that like one has to really reckon with. I think, especially being a photographer, because and maybe this is getting a little bit into Laura Mulvey territory, which her essay visual, or what is it, visual pleasure and narrative cinema, where she coins the phrase the male gaze in her analysis of the work of um, Alfred Hitchcock. It's one of the best essays that you can get, but it is like it's challenging to the degree in which, like, as a photographer, you have to sort of reckon with the kind of phallocentric and like the kind of capturing elements, in which like the camera frames, but it also captures. And so to capture also creates this kind of like definition to a degree. And I think that people get kind of can get a little lost in the sauce on that sort of like dialogue, and they get wrapped up in their own heads to a degree. But I think that there's also like an importance to when you have a working relationship with your subject and like or the model or whatever, in such a way that you can actually like that their presence itself, even though it is like there to be seen, that they have this ability to look back, that they assert themselves in the image to some degree, and that it makes it hopefully like re-engages like a complexity in that relationship to the nature of the camera. Because I think that it's also like it's not just when photographing like individuals or like people or whatever, it's also like just a general sort of way in which like thinking about the legacies of people like Edward Weston or like Ansel Adams and these types of like masculinist approaches, or like the early like landscape like survey photography that was done in the West, is like all things that like we have to sort of maybe not think about every time that you pick up the camera. You don't have to like redo the discourse inside of your head every single time, but it is like something to be cognizant of. And how do we position ourselves in that relationship, I think is really important to think about.
One of photography's original sins.
Absolutely. So all of that to say, I love this image, but it's also like just the way in which she stares back, I think is just like it has this striking quality to it that has always been so interesting to me personally. So, ooh, this image is more pixelated than I remembered, but so I've talked a little bit about studio and then also about instant film, but I also want to talk about some like of the more experimental elements of like my portraiture practice. And so this is like a image of my ex that was like 20 frames all compressed into one over the course of like talking together for like over an hour, just like repeatedly taking photos throughout the course of that, and then compressing all of them into like a single image through Photoshop magic. I'm thinking about like the ways in which like the camera, the single image acts as this like frozen moment, but there are ways in which like through repetition or like through the editing and like printing process that one can sort of like expand and contract time, and wanting to figure out how to portray those elements, as well as like the way in which like averages sort of come out and like repeated forms inside of ourselves and our own sort of like portrayals, and then when those moments also like when we surprise ourselves, when we zig when we normally zag type of thing, all of a sudden like breaks through in these very interesting moments. And so just thinking a lot about that, and then this was a part of like a few different series of which I did a similar process with others. And so, but I always found, even though that this was the first one, like probably the most successful, but different types of emotional investment probably have a factor in that. And then this is an image of like a CRT screen that has been like digitally documented, of one of my friends, Wesley, and thinking about the way in which the screen is this thing that we are like so cognizant of, but also like it exists as this thing that is supposed to disappear. Like I'm speaking to you through this mediation of the screen. Like so much of our daily lives, like news, media, all these different things come to us like instantaneously through these black boxes, and that tension between like their seamlessness in our society, but also their ubiquity is like a very funny element to me. And it's like I get caught up on like the tension between the nostalgic element of the visual, because I don't really have a lot of nostalgia for CRT TVs outside of just like liking the way that they look, but in its particular, I don't really have a lot of memories or like experiences with them that I could be like, ah, weren't those the good old days type of thing. Uh but
The
I
good
do
old
think that
days that we never personally experienced, right?
yeah. But I do think that there is something that like antiquated media gives us this opportunity to like make visible or present certain elements of things that are harder to see in our everyday life because they've been so thoroughly integrated. And that is like just the nature of technological revolution, is this thing changes the entire history by reorienting its uh, domination. That's why people talk so thoroughly about like the pre and post digital age or like the internet. But it can be very hard to see when you are in the midst of it. It's like the fish in water sort of thing where you're just like, what water? Because why would you need to think about it in those terms? And so I think that that element of my practice comes through a lot, and we'll see some more works that are oriented around that. So next I want to talk about architecture, still sticking to the photo side of my process, because you know, can't just do portraiture all day long. At some point you got to look out at the world. And I think for me portraiture is like a great way of like, or architecture is this great way of like understanding the tensions between built environment and our sort of like our psychological needs are really important, and the way in which where we live influences, or like the way in which like the world around us looks influences the way that we can perceive or like imagine the world. And so I think a big part of it for me is just like when I was out in the Pacific Northwest, there is all this sort of like space because of the lack of population density in comparison to being out here on the East Coast. And that space is like has this possibility. There's always potential existing in emptiness. Voids are inherently unstable as they can be filled at any moment. And so when I was out there, I was taking a lot of like photos of these sort of open areas, or like I love a good open parking lot, because, or like behind a grocery store, like a supermarket or something, because there's like a type of tragedy to the degree in which like there's this uh, destruction of the natural environment, this sort of like huge paved over area that no longer has this kind of like potential for like a type of organic life. But when you begin to pay attention, you see all the like cracks and everything, but also it speaks to the way in which like we build and design our world against our own interest to a degree, in which much of it is there to facilitate like the flow of commerce. Shopping is so important to just the day-to-day experience, or going to these like very dehumanizing kind of places just to move the elements of capital around. And there's a like a tension to I'm gonna have to say it, like the liminal space, I guess, even though I don't want to say it because it's so overdone to a degree, but it's also like I think that it's the only way to sort of describe when we like, encounter the like the ruin of capital, or this sort of eeriness that is sort of left behind, or like in transition between what was there and the thing that is not yet come. But also the way in which uh, like I took this photo when I was living in Philadelphia, and one of the things that you see a lot in Philly is this destruction of like a lot of the older properties, and they come back up as this, I'm gonna call it like developer core, which is a very like I hope derogatory term for these like the shittiest houses that you've ever seen in your entire life. And it happens in the Pacific Northwest a lot as well, like a lot of the ubiquitousness of like these type of one bedroom housing units that are just like the most non-space that one can get. It's intentionally designed to just be able to be popped down wherever you go. And there's a French sociologist, Marc Aguë, who wrote a book called Non-Places, in which he talks about the way in which capital homogenizes built environment, because it makes it more seamless, like it reduces the friction and the flow of transaction. And so a non-place is like a hotel or a shopping mall, or these types of apartments that like you see littered up and down like big cities on the East Coast, where it's like something like this could exist in New York, it could exist in Philadelphia, Baltimore, Richmond, and it's like and they are terrible, nobody likes them, but it's also like that decision towards them is outside of the hands of the people that actually live in these environments, because financialization in the cities, like the way in which like financialization and capitalization of real estate markets has just and like that being the sort of thing that precipitates gentrification, homogenizes and just destroys communities. It reduces our social and democratic input into the system by turning everything into the gray goo, basically, or the architectural form of the gray goo. Oops. Take me back. Take me back. Okay. Okay, I'm back. So, and then busting out the Polaroid again. This was like a luxury condo building that was being put up behind the Rodin Museum out in Philadelphia. And so I took this photo when it was still in the process of being made. And one of the things that was always hilarious was that in the advertising for this building, they would put the Rodin Museum, like a very generic like form of it, in the advertising campaign to make it look like the museum was just essentially a part of like the backyard of the apartments. It was truly some demonic shit, honestly. But it's like people's ability to sort of like resist or to, I don't know, have an informed kind of like relationship to the way that these land spaces and this like new developments are actually like utilized and integrated into communities is just incredibly small. So yeah, I think that that's what I think a lot about with architecture. So next, I have installation work that I want to show. And so after I graduated, I really started to get into installation as like a way to like really expand my artistic horizons, but also like after I graduated, I didn't have a lot of access to cameras or technology or any of the things that I had grown accustomed to in my art making process. And so I needed to figure out how to keep working. And Garth Amundsen, who is the photo professor at Western, always one of his pieces of advice that I always took to heart was like, how do you fill up as much space as you can that breaks down into the smallest amount of space possible? And so I really kind of took that to heart as I went into grad school, and I made this piece right here, Blue Reminder. And thinking a lot about the way in which people move through spatial situations. And I was really obsessed with getting people to walk in a circle. And so making this sort of like quadrant shape that had permeable walls that people would walk around. And as you moved through the space, the black lights on the one side of the room were activating solar panel cells that would generate sound. So your movement and your breaking of the curtains would actually change the sound of the room, which was a technique that I learned from one Dana Olsted, who is teaching this class. Kind of gave me the quick and dirty like chops on how to set up this sort of like, what would you call it, like a optotheremin kind of room installation. This piece right here is called Total Trash, after the Sonic Youth song. It's one of my favorite songs of all time. and it's sort of a allusion to just a history of going to punk rock shows or like house venues, shitty little like basement shows and everything, wanting to make a little love letter to like, and also introduce some like more chaos into the work. And I really loved making this piece. It was like the explosiveness of it was very satisfying. Though one of my friends did give me the best critique on this piece. My friend Alex, who was a painter, was like, not enough stickers. It needed more stickers. And so always bring your stickers with you at any house show. I want to cap off this installation piece with this one. This is a work called or it's an allusion to a Freud quote called "Everything is somehow preserved." And so this was sort of like the capstone, my thesis artwork, in which I finally was able to get people to walk around in a circle the way that I wanted them to. And so there are these like fabric walls that drape down from the ceiling, and this sort of like multi-layered box formation. And so as you walked around the piece, it had motion sensors. So it would almost like speak to you. Like there was always this acknowledgement if you got close enough and moved in certain ways. And so it helped encourage that like circular motion that I think like there's this real religious context to it. But I'm not really one for religion, but I do think that there is something like spiritually satisfying about that kind of recognition of like acknowledgement or like insideness versus outsideness. And so I wanted to play that up with this piece and kind of using like something that almost looked like a Japanese paper lantern with this like ethereal glow to draw people in very softly. So here's just another angle on that work. This is a rework of the first installation I showed, the blue reminder for another gallery. This one even having multiple rooms in which like the full piece sort of expanded out in different ways, and like different effects of like integrating video and blacklight and things into it. It was a lot of fun. Because I'm running short on time, I'm gonna zoom through some of this last part. And so for some current works, I want to show this video piece, or at least part of this video. Probably not as much as I would have liked, but here we go. This one is called Jackson Hole. It's a collaboration with or Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It's a collaboration with this person who is on the left here, Jasmine Crosby, who is one of my best friends, like truly an inspiration to me artistically. And she and I did a lot of work because we had a lot of similar interests. And so I'll let the video explain what it's about a little bit.
Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Main Street, Wyoming is made possible in part by grants from Kennecott Energy, proud to be a part of Wyoming's future in the uranium exploration, mining, and production industry, and by the Wyoming Council for the Humanities, enriching lives of Wyoming people through the study of Wyoming history, values, and ideas.
An American invention in the 1870s led to the end of the open range and the settlement of Wyoming. Can you name that invention? Join us on Main Street, Wyoming to find out the stories about barbed wire and brands, two tools that changed the course of Wyoming history. Welcome to Main Street, Wyoming. I'm Deborah Hammonds, and on today's program, I have two sets of guests to share their expertise about barbed wire and brands. First, Joe Lawrence from Casper, one of our state's prime collectors of barbed wire, is with us. Later, I'll be talking with Ann Noble and Bill Runner about Wyoming brands. Joe, we are surrounded with just a fraction of your collection of barbed wire. Can you tell me when barbed wire was first invented?
Barbed wire was actually invented in the 1860s, but the true barbed wire, what they call a barb, was invented in the 1870s, and the first patent was 1874 by Joseph Glidden.
So Glidden, that's the kind of barbed wire that we still use today?
Yes, he invented the first barbed wire. He had the first patent on it, and that's the one that was very popular then and is still popular today because it was cheap to make.
And so that's what people were looking like. Before that, I guess, what was it about barbed wire that made it so necessary in the settlement of the West?
Well, barbed wire, the reason it was invented is because, the government wanted people to come west and settle the land because there was lots of it. The West was an open range at the time. There were big cattle barons, and so when the settlers came into the West, they needed something to protect their gardens and protect their crops. So this is actually what started barbed wire. There were three gentlemen, Elwood, Hash, and Glidden, all attended a fair in DeKalb, Illinois, in 1873, and not together, but separately. And these three gentlemen, one was a farmer, and one was a hardware man, and another one was a businessman. And they all decided separately to build a barbed wire. And what they were looking at the county fair was this barbed piece of wood that actually was barbed with nails and attached to the top of a fence. And they thought, well, now if that's a good idea, but we need something that we can fence our gardens and our lot with. So they turned around and invented barbed wire. The first piece of barbed wire actually was done on a coffee mill. Joseph Glidden took his wife's coffee mill and tore it apart and actually produced the first Glidden barb, which is this barb right here, on a coffee mill.
Isn't that something? So that's whenever you have someone in your house who's an inventor and starts taking apart things and stuff, think it may end up being worth millions of dollars.
And it was.
An idea that changed the West. Well, you mentioned some of these. Now, I know in your collection that these are what you call your exotics. Are they your?
They're the exotic.
Yes. So this man goes on to explain the history of barbed wire and the West. And the two videos that you're seeing side by side are like of a live stream of Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where we found this archival, like public access audio from, and I think to us, the video, or like the tension comes out of this sort of on the one hand, this sort of mundane element of the live stream, excuse me, and the way in which like the things that he's talking about are actually like, we're talking about the enclosure when he's describing the way in which like there's this like land and this wilderness and everything. It's a story that intentionally, or I mean, I don't know this man's heart, so I can't say intentionally or unintentionally, but it does exclude the realities of like the displacement of Native Americans on this planet or in this area. And we see the tension drawn out of like the mundane realities of like what it means for enclosure and for like continuing settlement colonization to happen. And now there is this sort of like mundane observation of like this that is broken up by like the or the visual like distortion, breaking up that sort of like peaceful sense, hopefully, of the story that is like so highly curated and sanitized, but also like about the mundane violences that take place and like the way in which architecture and innovation like of shaping and reshaping that built environment is able to draw out, and it speaks to both a truth but also a lie, and which modern society is always sitting on top of. Like we are constantly anxious of like ghosts and like of the past because they remind us that like it was not always this way. There is always this story that is being like excluded in that relationship. I realize that I think I'm out of time at this point, so as I went a little long in the beginning, so I apologize, but I do want to, I think especially at this like particular moment, like thinking about the mundane ways in which especially technology and surveillance and like capture technology of like enclosure is so important to like always be like cognizant of, and it's the ease of its integration into our histories and lexicons, in which like barbed wire is actually this incredibly violent tool that has been utilized now the world over, that was originally to keep cattle in but also to keep native peoples out, and now is being utilized the world over to do much the same still.
There's something so eerie in having her kind of like small town accent so cheerily say like barbed wire, an idea that changed the West.
Absolutely. It's very intentionally supposed to be this eerie
Yeah.
video. So unfortunately I don't have time to get to these other
No, oh my goodness.
pieces. Yeah, I was going to talk about these last two, but another time perhaps. I'm
That's
gonna
awesome.
make my presentation, it's under the time limit at one day.
I've got a ton of questions, but I want to open it up. Lewis, Sam, Eli, or Violet, do you have any questions about either the work that we just saw, or maybe even just going to grad school or living and working in New York City? We have a few minutes with Quinton before we have to let him go, so I wanted to turn it over to you all.
I had a question. I'm not sure if I wasn't here for the beginning, but do you take photos of just like random people in public? And I was kind of wondering, I see a lot of photographers who do that. How is that not like a super uncomfortable or confrontational?
It depends. Like you are technically and legally allowed to take a photo of anybody who is in public. That is not, it is different in where Dana is in Japan, where they have very strict laws against doing such things. But I personally try not to, One, because I'm just really not interested in that type of photography, but I do think that there is something to like respecting people's kind of like privacy to a degree, even in public spaces. I know that this is not always like the case, and there's a lot of like mundane things that people do that they feel no like way about being portrayed, which is fine. At the Western Gallery, they actually had a very good show that was about this, where a man was taking photos from the sidewalk with like a telephoto lens, but it was of people who were like totally obscured, like you couldn't tell who they were in any way in their images, but was sued for like violations of like personal privacy type of things. And so if you can look it up, or like go to the Western Gallery, which is so close to the art department building, I'm sure that somebody there could probably point you in the direction of what that was about. But it was like it sprawled into this huge like lawsuit and case about like when is it okay versus not okay to take photos of people, and like especially in their own homes and things. But yeah, I say you know, better safe than sorry, especially in America where people are fucking crazy about certain things. But you know, I mean, I've also taken my fair share of photos of like public events and things, and so it's like a part of it. Or like you go to shows and you take photos of like the crowd and everything, and people are in the vibe. It's like fine, I think, in certain situations. I think you just kind of got to take that temperature check and like know your own heart to a degree.
Yeah, I think the reason I thought of that is just I remember there it might have been in New York with this photographer who would just snap a photo of people's faces walking on the street. I think it was
Mhm.
some kind of famous guy, but it was like capturing just like random people's emotions. But at the same time, I thought it was like really invasive because he was taking these flash photos of people just minding their own business. But I always was just kind of wondering about that because I feel like I see a lot of photos of random people from photographers, and I don't know how that goes. So
Mhm. Yeah, don't do that. That's a great way to get your ass beat. So, so I cannot endorse that activity unless you're like really good at either running or you can are a smooth talker in some sort of way.
That's an excellent question that we could probably talk for an entire quarter about. Anyone else have questions for Quinton? Quinton actually had a like I think this jumps onto that question. It's very straightforward, but when you're doing portraiture, it definitely seems like you have a slower, more grown and developed relationship with your subject. Do you instruct them just like everyone seems so peaceful and like and kind of like loving, and it's very romanticized my read of it, but like do you have like just this very simple logistical question, like do you have like posing suggestions, or like how do you fall into that moment of like now I'm going to press the button?
Yeah, I think definitely talking with people beforehand, like getting the warm up, also doing like how people do like acting exercises, like breathing and everything, going through a couple dry runs and everything, as well as just like getting to know people. Like I try, and especially if I'm going to be shooting with a model who I've not worked with before, like meeting up with them beforehand to actually get like a like get comfortable with them, because especially when you're not working with like people who are professionals, being in front of the camera in with all the equipment and the lighting around it can be a very uncomfortable experience. And so but the more time that you spend in that sort of like pre-production phase, or just like getting people warmed up to the studio and everything, the more likely they are to kind of like let their guard down and kind of relax a little bit. Um, and also just like as the photographer, like taking the lead on like suggesting and like being open to like helping pose people, and always, oh, a most important thing is like if you're going to be like moving your models into like blocking positions or anything, but always like do it in a comfortable way with like emphasis on like equitability and consent. Like always ask before moving anybody, and like making sure that people are consistently comfortable and checking in with everybody. It's like absolutely key.
Nice. Anyone else? Questions for Quinton? Quinton, I had one that's like a little bit out of left field, but it, sorry, I have like so many questions. I thought that I had never seen your piece Total Trash before.
Mhm.
And actually, can you go back to that point in your presentation really quickly?
Yes. Second. Um,
Sorry to spring this on you.
oh no, please.
All right. And then can you go forward to is it something like something will remain or everything remains?
Yes, this one.
Yeah. Okay. So I'd seen this before and go back to Total
Mhm.
Trash. So this just looks like it's making like it is so like narrative rich with the story of its own making, kind of like explosively so, right? like
Mhm.
like I feel the backstory of this piece so dynamically that like my first thought was like, oh man, is there like a video of you making this piece, or was that part of the work? And then my mind was going back and forth like, would I find that more interesting if you were in there hyper dynamically, kind of explosively making this piece, or if you were like very methodically, like very carefully placing like each element or something, right? Like what would I find
Mhm.
more compelling or interesting? And then I just thought to myself, it got so weird that this piece I really, really think about its making and the dynamic nature or the dynamic narrative of his own making versus like the next piece. I had never really thought about that. Like I just accepted the next piece as like it exists in this form and now it's like ready to go, but like really there's nothing separating like the function or the narrative of making or installing this piece versus the previous one. um do those things like operate for you? Is the
Mhm.
installation potentially part of the process, part of the work, something like that you would ever present or you have presented? Like were people invited into this space while you made this work, versus the other one? Anyway, it's something that I thought about.
Yeah, this one definitely did have some other people had a hand at various points. Like that chair that is destroyed to the left of the television. There is a man, somewhere on a DV tape, I have the video of myself and Jasmine destroying it as a performance piece. Um, and uh yeah, other people came in throughout the process and helped hang up and destroy elements of the room. And there was like a whole series of photos that went along with as people would come in and hang out in here. I was documenting that. And I think that there is a difference. Like I think about there is an essay by Boris Groys, who is a critical theorist, like has written a lot about a whole litany of subjects, honestly. He's a art historian who specializes in Soviet art as well. And he has an essay called Installing Communism that is about the way in which like there's a tension between the existence of like installation as this thing that like we come upon, especially like certain installations that like to imagine themselves as being like equitable or interactive in these ways that like undermine that original idea of like the like the viewer and the artist sort of thing. And he's very against those types of notions because it's like there's a falsity to that always. There's actually a highly dictatorial element in the notion that like interactivity or like this kind of like you've come upon something that feels like it's just been spawned out of the walls themselves. It's like that's actually a highly like mystified state in which one sort of exists within. Whereas certain things that act as almost like a remnant or a thing that is exposing itself like its own creation or its own relationship to its where it derives its power from is much more sort of critical and actually like or it exists in a state of like auto-criticism rather than in trying to like mystify the viewer into thinking that like oh I've entered into this like more perfect space because the reality is that there is no more perfect space. You've actually entered into a very highly like aestheticized private space. And I think that I'm highly guilty of that as well. Like I think that like the thesis work, like this one, I wanted to come into it with that kind of like dynamic of like the thinking about that insideness and outsideness and the way in which like we step into these like aestheticized forms, but I don't know if it's like critical in that way. And I don't know if every work has to be per se, but it is certainly like a it is always a part of like whenever you're doing installation or like engaging in installation works that like we should be cognizant of. Like I'm gonna be a hater right now for a little bit, and just like there are a lot of art installation works that are like just essentially like Instagram opportunities or like these kind of like they're the artistic versions of like a Disneyland exhibit. I'm not gonna name names aside from Meow Wolf. Excuse me.
Oh, zing.
And then but or like there are like all of these other like the Bubble Museum or like the or these different types of things, or even to an extent like you see work like the Infinity Rooms by Yayoi Kusama, which is like this very beautiful piece, but I'll tell you what, the infinity is the least amount of anything. That is as about as far away from infinity as you're possibly going to get, is like the experience of that room. And so like the notion like is there is like destroyed by its own perception. And so I think that like it's an important part of if you're gonna go down the installation route, is like, well, what is it that you're actually trying to say? And do people walk away like with something that has expanded, or are they more like has it expanded like their sense of like their relationship with the world around them or with like a particular idea, or has it just like reinforced like the kind of the seamless flow of like I love moving from spectacle to spectacle
While
so
scrolling.
yeah, so sorry to end on like a haterish note there, but I
No
think
way.
it's
I
important to keep in mind.
almost didn't ask that question, but boy howdy, am I glad I did. We got to see some Kusama shade and some Meow Wolf shade. That was fantastic.
Yeah,
Um,
so
awesome. Thank you so much for your perspective on that. We've run way over time. Sorry, everyone, for keeping you longer than intended. Any last minute questions for Quinton while we have him on Zoom? Cool. Thanks again for joining us live, you four. And Quinton, thank you so very much for sharing and for your time. And go to bed now. Have you eaten dinner already?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's the night is young.
Nice. Okay, cool. And then just a quick shameless plug that we have our next artist presentation on the 7th. We have somebody who works in Hollywood actually as part of the camera crew. She bounces between first and second camera assistant on like huge major TV shows and movies like White Lotus, or I'm forgetting the other ones now, but it's on our visiting artists page. So check that out and join us on the 7th if you can. Cool. Thank you, Quinton.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you. Have a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, have a good night, y'all.